feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled movie review. Oh, they're cheering for us, Eric.
Yep.
I don't know if anyone can even hear that.
Those are our 5 fans.
I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside. He's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved. Eric Marchin.
Matt, it's day 4 of the Toronto International Film Festival. I had to think there for a second.
I was like, is it 4?
Is it 4? You are feeling similar.
I'm on 4 hours sleep, so
to
there's a
how
theme
I
of 4.
was. Yeah. 4 for 4, before 4, the famous Canadian band that
Before
if you
4,
get down on me, I'll get down on you.
Which we will be doing today.
Yes, with the Fabelmans.
Yes, today we are reviewing probably one of the biggest films to ever premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival, Steven Spielberg's The Fabelmans.
Yes.
And it is that because Spielberg said this in his intro, is his first and only film that's ever played a film festival, he said.
Yeah.
I don't know if that is true.
I think Lincoln played AFI,
Yeah.
but I think it's specifically like in competition because it is eligible for the People's Choice Award, and this is the world premiere of The Fabelmans, or it was the world premiere last night. So the first time that public, industry, and press were all huddled up in the Princess of Wales Theatre as Cameron Bailey came out to introduce Steven Spielberg, and you can pretty much guess that the screening didn't start for what felt like at least like a half an hour from the initial start time. And so, with that, there was a lot of anticipation, a lot of excitement just to have Spielberg come out on the stage and introduce the film and, kind of give an opening statement or remark. And I think, he kind of put it well by saying that, the movie speaks for itself. And if you're familiar with Steven Spielberg, as, I think most film fans are, whether you're more of a casual moviegoer or a diehard cinephile, he's shaped the language of cinema in both the studio realm and in just kind of the culture as a whole, and is probably the most synonymous name when it comes to the definition of a movie director.
We were talking earlier today saying
Yeah.
like he's got to be like, if you went up to 50 random people on the street, if you said name a film director or a movie director, like Spielberg probably is going to be one, if not the only one, that most people say.
and for good reason. I mean, he has made
some of the most
an indelible
iconic
mark.
movies of all time: Jaws, Jurassic Park,
Close Encounters, Schindler's List, The Color Purple. I mean, the list goes on, and not just him as a director, but as a producer, as a studio head, but also a movie fan himself. And again,
this movie being about his childhood and his family and why he loves movies and why he is who he is, I think it was such a special, like, we'll get into the movie itself, but I think just for me and you, your favorite movie of all time is Jaws, my favorite movie of all time is Jurassic Park, so you could tell that it was a pretty special night, like, to be at that world premiere, see him intro the movie. We stayed for a Q&A, so you know it's a special night when Matt and Eric stay for a Q&A after the movie, and a calculated risk by us because it was a moderated Q&A by Cameron Bailey. There were no audience questions, and people who listen to us know that we just bail out of Q&As because of those audience questions most of the time, but it was just really special to be there, no matter how I was going to feel about the movie, and again we'll get into that in just a few moments, but it was just pretty incredible to see him in person and speak and talk about the movie afterwards too.
It's a once in a lifetime opportunity, and to see a filmmaker that has influenced your own life and your love of movies. It's kind of like seeing I don't want to put him on that pedestal, but like seeing your God in the flesh kind of in a way for movie nerds. And yeah, I mean, he's one of those guys that you are listening to every word he says and every answer he gives to Cameron Bailey's, thoughtful and direct questions. And I think the best Q&As are the ones that are just, moderated between a programmer and the filmmaker. And
maybe take questions from online, like submit them beforehand. That way you can kind of go through.
You can vet them and find the good ones, because there are some, in the past there have been some really good questions from the audience, but for every good question there's at least 7 that are either a statement or making it about them. But the Fabelmans,
let's get into the movie.
So up front, we should also say with this that it is autofiction, but at the same time there is more of Spielberg than I was expecting, because this is a script that
the names are changed in a lot of
Sammy Fabelman, but Steven Spielberg. But so Spielberg basically wrote this during the pandemic with Tony Kushner. This is one of Spielberg's only credited writing projects in terms of him making a film. So it really goes to show you how personal this is. And he even said during the Q&A that it was almost like therapy sessions with Tony Kushner in terms of writing it. But if you followed Spielberg in any way, whether it be, again, in a kind of sort of laid back manner, but or more specific, like if you've read any of his autobiographies or bios, you kind of know the beats that it's going to play with. You start with, the Fabelmans in the 1950s in New Jersey, around the holiday season. The first film that a young Sammy Fabelman sees in theaters is the film that would forever change Spielberg, the Greatest Show on Earth, the Cecil B. DeMille movie with Charlton Heston. And watching that, we see that kind of classic and maybe somewhat cliched, just given the recent bout of auto-fiction, personal stories from filmmakers,
lately,
whether it be Belfast or, even something as decades old now, like Cinema Paradiso, where you have the child looking up at the screen, kind of captured
light
in
flickering
wonder,
in front of them,
things like that. From there, he becomes kind of completely enamored by filmmaking and being in control of how to construct a scene. And we see that, his family is a relatively large Jewish American family. He has 3 sisters and a dad who is, a computer genius, an early adopter of a technical form that is still very much in its infancy. We talk about that a lot, where like social media and technology has progressed so much over the years, but this was at a time when oscilloscope radios and the early kind of modifications to computer tech were around. And so the Arnold surrogate, played by Paul Dano, is kind of always busy with work and very pragmatic and doesn't necessarily believe that Sammy's career and hobby will coincide with one another, where his mother
he calls it a hobby over and over and over
and his mother, his Leah adjacent mother, played by Michelle Williams, is more on the artistic sort of side of things, where she does kind of enable him and want to stoke those passions, but she's also going through some changes of her own, and it sort of deals with mental health and wellness, and sort of looking at that dynamic between the mother and the father over the years. And as we see the story progress, we also are introduced to another party, a kind of uncle type figure played by Seth Rogen in the movie, who will play a pivotal role later on as well. And so we see this dynamic of this family kind of getting along, and during the holiday season we see Sammy wanting to be a part of Christmas, but being a young Jewish kid, you don't necessarily understand that maybe that concept and what goes into it. But it, like, that first visual image is very strong when the Fabelmans are driving home and you see all the Christmas lights, and then the one house that doesn't have it, and again, it's looking at the way that there's a form of segregation and sort of being sort of marginalized within a community that is very much Christian. And so from that period, we kind of cut to Arizona, where a huge part of Sammy's life will be kind of influenced in terms of like that early filmmaking style. You know, we see the guerrilla filmmaking at its finest when him and his Boy Scout buddies are gathering up scorpions, which gave me an anxiety attack because I don't know how
I saw my first scorpion when I was in Croatia. Like, I've never seen one in person.
Out of all the places you could see a scorpion, Croatia.
We were it was in our pool house from the villa we rented. That sounds so douchey when I say that.
Right.
But like, there was just a scorpion on the wall.
I mean, you should have brought this up with our review for Glass Onion. It would have been more appropriate. But in those sequences, you can also see, this kid who's now played by Gabriel LaBelle, a Canadian actor as well. So 2 Canadians in this movie with Rogen and LaBelle. But you can see the composition types that, like, you see the moments that are both like E.T. and Raiders-esque. Yeah. And the way that, like, he frames certain scenes. So like the shot of, like, seeing somebody between someone's legs and stuff like that. And all the filmmaking stuff is a lot of fun. But then again, you have the melodrama or the kind of the struggles with the impending sort of separation of the mother and father, and
Spoilers.
something that would influence Spielberg for the rest of his life.
Totally, yeah. And I think, I obviously Spielberg's most personal film, and I feel like the film is at its best when it's I didn't expect it to focus. I know the movie's called The Fabelmans, but when you hear something like this, you're like, oh, it's just going to be why he fell in love with movies. And, we talk about biopics all the time, and we're getting this interesting thing with filmmakers almost not doing their own biopics, but just these nostalgic pieces on their childhoods and stuff like that.
Roma as well, Alfonso Cuarón.
Exactly. And, like, they don't necessarily involve, like, this is how I became a filmmaker, more so this is how I grew up, what inspired me, why I make the movies that I make, what my family put into this, and it's not necessarily about Spielberg, but about his family. And I guess I should have known that from the title of The Fabelmans, and not it be called Sammy or Spielberg or whatever he wants to call it. But like, I like that it's more of a family drama than a biopic or anything, right? And then that's where that autofiction comes in, where it's not necessarily exactly like, here's how Steven Spielberg became Steven Spielberg, even though it is that. But I like that it is just this kind of period piece family drama about, obviously focused on this kid that is just obsessed with and loves the movies. I like all the stuff when he's a teen making his first films. Like, I thought that stuff was great, like how he used special effects. Spielberg talked a little bit about that in the Q&A. In camera, or poking holes in a film print, or trying to make explosions with like just dirt in a wooden board. So you saw all those like kind of behind the scenes things of how he did that, and how he learned to like his craft at an early age, and how creative he was when making that stuff. And I think that stuff's really awesome. Gabriel LaBelle, you said, is the young man's name. I thought he was excellent. Like, I thought he carries the movie. He's literally in basically the majority of it. I thought he was very charismatic and just fantastic.
And kind of good at kind of like finding that balance of being both naturalistic in that kind of awkward teenage kind of way, but also, having to kind of grow up a little bit more because of, having to deal with his mother's affair with the family friend, and played by Rogen, where Benny, where
I love Seth Rogen. It did take me out a little bit.
Well, his laugh specifically. I think there's a dinner scene early on where, like, it's like, okay, that
I think
he's good though.
He is good. I like him, and I like him when he does stuff like this, where he goes a little bit out of his comfort zone and does something a bit more dramatic and subtle.
And he's weirdly more subtle, I think, than Michelle Williams and Paul Dano at times.
And that's something I sort of tweeted last night, and we talked a little bit about, where I think the movie's great. I think from a technical standpoint, obviously Spielberg's a master, and it is a very, very well-made movie.
Yes.
The runtime it's 2.5 hours, but I was completely engaged throughout the whole thing. I think loving Spielberg, I feel like anyone who does love that man will see that and want to know everything about his childhood and his family. I do agree that Dano and Williams, while I do like them for the majority of the film,
Williams is going to win an Oscar already, right? It's been declared. It's done.
I don't agree with that, and I also just, like, it is one of those showy kind of Oscar-y performances, for sure. I absolutely agree with that. But I think that's both a pro and a con, where at times I think in the scenes where it feels a little less showy and a little bit more subtle or natural, like I think they're both great, but there are times, especially because it's a period piece, and I know maybe even Spielberg's doing that intentionally to feel kind of older, right? Like not so modern, because it's supposed to fit the time period, where some of the acting does feel like kind of showy and
stilted in a way.
Stilted, yeah. And I feel like there are a couple moments and a couple scenes that stand out to me that I'm like, they're going, but they're going to like 11 or 12,
yeah.
And that's the stuff that kind of took me out of it a little bit, when it's just they felt like actors performing something rather than Spielberg's parents to me in those moments. And I know I've talked to you and other people that are like, well, his mother was like that and his father was like that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I get that,
but there is a certain amount of stylization within the sort of character arcs that they're playing, right? Where it's not necessarily melodrama, but there is kind of a kind of a throwback quality to it, to the time period itself, taking place in the 1950s and 60s,
and stuff
right?
that he fell in love with. Like I felt like the acting styles are very different then and now, right? And I felt like some of the performances almost felt old,
and it does also clash a little bit. I think you mentioned Spielberg being a technical master at his craft, and he is. And I do like Janusz Kaminski as a cinematographer, but I do feel with this and even West Side Story, the visuals kind of clash a little bit at times, because again, like West Side Story, I think there was maybe some sort of attempt at bringing a contemporary style and almost a dystopian kind of quality to kind of the ruins of New York.
I think the showiness of a musical too, like his kind of sweeping cinematography and stuff like that works. But I get you
but
mean
with
the look.
This, like the kind of washed out, saturated kind of the lights kind of like
coming in through the window and kind of giving it this like kind of.
It doesn't work for the time period, because the time period was more Technicolor. It kind of was more artificial, where you do see some of the production design of this movie, whether it be the lawns or the neighborhoods kind of look more artificial, and like they have that kind of facade quality, but then it clashes with kind of like the look being kind of, again, it almost like looks like The Hobbit or something, where it's like 48 frames per second.
And that goes back to the acting thing we just talked about too. And I go, maybe that's intentional, right? Like, because he wants this to feel like a movie version of his, like, that's why maybe it's not called, the character's not called Steven and they're called the Fabelmans. And it's like, no, this is a movie version of my life, right? And even getting to the final frames of the movie and some of the more meta kind of things there. And I think I even heard someone today talking about it. I don't want to get into it because it's not spoilers, these are all like real things, but from the actual movie, I just felt like maybe that artificialness of it is intentional, but I agree with you that it like didn't necessarily completely work.
No,
it took me out of it a little bit.
But it's one of those things where like you accept it for what it is, because that was his choice. Like I think it also deals with a lot of things that his Jewish identity and how he faced anti-Semitism and
from some
numerous
and
individuals, and I think the high school stuff is actually very funny at times too, and charming.
His girlfriend and
Christian girlfriend and things like that work really well, and going back to just like the idea of the family thing, it's very much an ensemble piece in that way, but it is also Sammy / Steven figuring out why he is the way he is, why he is not more like his father or some of his sisters, and why he is so obsessed with making a movie instead of doing something that's of more quote-unquote value. And you mentioned already that Paul Dano's character always says this is a hobby, this is something I can't necessarily completely support.
And there's a speech of saying why it's not important versus what is important.
But then you have a moment of grief where the mother's the grandmother passes away, and Michelle Williams' character's mother passes away, and that eccentric uncle comes to visit, played by Judd Hirsch, who's wonderful in a cameo role.
Really, really great scene.
But kind of gives you and Sammy context into this is this side of your family, and this is this is who you are, and it's a part of who you are, and you need to embrace that. You shouldn't be afraid of it. That's how some people are wired, you know.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Like it weirdly, I don't know why I'm comparing it to this, but there's a speech that's kind of similar in Top Gun Maverick where Tom Cruise is talking about, to Val Kilmer's character about teaching. It's like, how do you teach somebody who you just are? You know, you can't teach that. You have to be it or you're not. And that's kind of the insight that Judge Hirsch's uncle character kind of gives Sammy, and it's just, that's how it was on, that side of the family, and you have to kind of just not be afraid to embrace it. There's also a wonderful cameo by David Lynch that is incredible.
That's not a spoiler either, because he was cast.
We won't say how it kind of plays a role or where it plays a role, but it works brilliantly. And it's overly long.
A nice shot at like middle brow kind of movies,
which
like
again, kind of goes to like casting someone like David Lynch, who is a guy that's kind of avoided the mainstream his whole career
and has never done middle of the road.
No, never.
For sure.
But yeah,
love it or hate it, right? Like
it's hard not to recommend this movie, and
even at 2.5 hours.
Yeah, is it a masterpiece? I don't know. I'd like to watch it one more time, maybe outside of the festival, and just like on a day where I don't have anything else, and just completely focus on it. And being the last movie of the day, it kind of feels like, like we were overly tired, our bodies were aching by sitting in these very small
my God, my
seats.
ass was numb, bro.
Yeah.
But then it was the perfect movie for that too, where we saw 2 movies yesterday, and you guys can check out our Glass Onion review, which should be available for you guys right now as well. And it did rejuvenate me a little bit, like on a long day. And even though we were in 3 movies back to back to back at the Princess of Wales, like Glass Onion just being so incredibly fun, and then the Fabelmans just being this love letter to cinema and family and things like that. Like, it really did breathe life into me. I agree with you that I don't know if I think it's a masterpiece either, but I think it is a really, really solid piece of filmmaking that, Spielberg put everything into, literally. He talked really lovely about how this movie, was his way of bringing his parents back, and you can really kind of, and all his 3 sisters were there, and it was just felt like extremely, extremely personal. I know he's put elements of himself in all of his films. You talk about it quite often, Eric. And but it's just to actually kind of look at your own childhood and look at your relationship with your parents, and then for him in a 35 plus year career, 40-year career.
Oh, but yeah, because
50s.
Jaws was Duel was like 70.
I know he said 35 in the intro, but 35 films. What am I talking about? It's longer than 35 years, but it's just it's cool that he's he can do this, and it's a weird trend that we're seeing with directors, but I don't know if this will be the end of it, but
it almost feels like it, because he even joked that this isn't a swan song, like he's going to continue to make movies.
And
but it almost feels like this is a swan song for this kind of movie that's being made, because
even Lady Bird, which you said Spielberg brings up a lot, was Greta Gerwig about her childhood too,
and even filmmakers that maybe we're obviously Greta Gerwig is well established now, but you even look at something like Minari and Paul Thomas Anderson's Licorice Pizza, not necessarily just about him, but taking anecdotally from other people.
But isn't that what writing and film is? It is. Write what you know.
But I would hate to follow up Spielberg, and it's going to be interesting even talking about Empire of Light when we see it, because that's also supposed to have some
Armageddon time too, right? Again, this is...
But ones that are maybe centered around the movies, though, as well, specifically, I think, that are going to be interesting.
Empire of Light specifically.
As people are coming out of
it's okay.
A screening.
There's a screening that probably ended. We'll wrap this one up, but it's excellent. It really is a great film from a master filmmaker, and I think what you're gonna get when
if you love Spielberg, you're gonna see it. If you're even just a tad bit curious about the man who's made so many of the greatest blockbusters ever, you're gonna want to watch this. It's coming out during the American Thanksgiving. It's the trailer was just released. It's one of those films that I think it's a perfect entry point for people that maybe aren't as familiar, but it's also a movie that doesn't feel redundant either for people that do know a lot about Spielberg. It kind of adds even more texture to a man that so many people love and admire and have, you know, been influenced by their entire lives and you know and have been comforted by. You know, we go and see one of his movies to be taken away for a few hours, and whether it's, you know, something you grow up with, and we didn't talk a lot about it, but there is another really wonderful, powerful, genuine moment that isn't, you know, stilted or feels phony, is the divorce scene. I think that is a very realistic moment in a
well, you
film.
come from that, so like
yeah.
you can speak better to that than me, because that's a scene where I did think was overacted and was a lot.
Yeah,
like,
no, and I get that as well, but I feel like the way that the kids react specifically and how they're both confused, especially at that point where like divorce is a lot more common now, where, you know, the kids are both confused and upset and they're picking sides and they're also angry at each other and they don't know what to do. And I felt
all that
like
stuff
that
I agree with. I just
was
felt
very
Dano
sincere.
and
I'm talking more so from the point of view of the children,
all
because
the kids were great.
because
Julia Butters is in the movie too. She's great. All the kids are great. I think it's some of the adults that
but Spielberg is a great director of kids.
Yes,
he's always been,
and that shows in this movie. Where again, I don't,
unlike Nathan Fielder.
The one question, if I had a question at the Q&A, I just would have asked Spielberg, what did you think of Jurassic World Dominion?
Right. Or have you seen The Rehearsal?
I'm going to give the movie a 4 out of 5. I think it's quite good. It's a movie that even at 2.5 hours, I would suggest to anyone who loves the movies. Like, I'm excited for my mom to see it, because like I got her ticket to this and My Policeman, and I think it is one of those movies that it's just a great family drama. She probably doesn't know much about Spielberg. I don't even know if she knows it's about his childhood, but for her son, me, like, I don't make movies, I talk about them.
Right.
But still, just showing like to any parent of like a child like me or you who just loves the movies, and I think this movie is a good representation of that too.
Yeah. Well, even like that, just quickly, that title card, the Fabelmans, just being so classic, like Amblin style, with like even just like the blue underline. Right?
Yeah. No, it's great. 4 out of 5 for me.
4 out of 5 as well. I think it will possibly go higher on a rewatch.
Yeah,
because
I agree.
There is a lot there, and I think narratively as well, the way that it's not elliptical, but it is kind of almost like it has like a kind of, you know, like it doesn't move in a linear fashion. Like it's almost like a series of vignettes or chapters in a way.
But it's still very easy to follow on like something like Brother, which we talked about the other day.
Yeah, because it will jump a couple of years every now and then to get from, you know, New Jersey to Arizona to North California and that progression.
And then Los Angeles at the end. Go check it out when it's out in theaters, or if you can somehow get a ticket for the rest of the festival. There are a lot of screenings, so maybe same day or something like that, but just a cool thing to have him here, a cool thing to premiere this movie here. I was so glad we were able to kind of go to the premiere, and it lived up to it. It's a solid movie. Okay, everyone, that's gonna be it for Steven Spielbergo on this episode. Go check out our other reviews. We have reviews for Glass Onion, Brother, Bros, Weird, The Swimmers, and then we'll have a lot more. I like movies. Today there also should be a review out for Causeway, and an interview that Eric did with the director of Causeway.
I cut my thumb for that interview.
Yeah, so go check out all of that stuff right here on Untitled Movie Reviews and Untitled Movie Podcast. Go over to YouTube. There's no video versions. Actually, your interview will be on video, so go check that out over on the YouTube
Lucky
channel.
for all those fans craving our physical appearances.
And then one-stop shop for everything. Just head over to Letterboxd, which is Untitled_movies. That's probably your best spot. Thank you all for listening. Go follow me on all those social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
I'm Eric Martian. You can find more of my video reviews on rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
I think that Steven Spielberg is going places.